All right, we'll go ahead and begin. I appreciate everybody showing up. So right now we want to just talk about, this is our last and final meeting, and we'll go ahead and start talking about what we found, the results in this final meeting. So what we have here is our purpose today is to examine the data of how FlipGrid changed the perception of your guys' writing, because I did see some of that, and then compare those best practices that we discussed as a group over this semester with what your peer group thinks are best practices for FlipGrid, and then plan for next year on how we should teach and support TAT teachers using FlipGrid. Because again, I want you guys to be my ambassadors for FlipGrid next year, okay? Hey, Doc. So that is our purpose for this meeting right now. And my question that I had at the beginning of this, January was, what is the effectiveness of using FlipGrid as a feedback tool in grades 2 through 5? And will giving and receiving feedback using FlipGrid have an overall impact on student growth in writing when implemented by 1 or 2 year TAP teachers? So you can already see, I wanted you guys to talk about FlipGrid and student achievement, but with what was going on with quarantine and social distancing, we never got to that. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about what we got to. So the FlipGrid action team, if you didn't know, this consists of 5 of you guys, Miss Averill, Miss Edwards, Miss Poole, Miss Smith, and Miss Tribling. We've met 4 times this semester, and we've discussed our best practices and hindrances for the FlipGrid in the writing process. Okay, so that's what my action team consists of. And when we looked at the data, so what we did is we looked at your data from your students, and what we saw here, okay, yeah. So we actually looked at the final data. We looked at student achievement data, and we looked at 30 students from your classes. So we picked 6 students out of each class, and you guys had 2 low proficient writers, 2 average writers, and 2 proficient writers. And then we put them together. So I was supposed to have 30 kids, 30 students that we were going to measure over our average class. But we didn't have that. So instead, we're getting perception data of how you guys view FlipGrid and affected your ability to teach writing. And then we're also going to look at the surveys of the other TAP candidate cohort that you guys are with, and see how they're using FlipGrid. And then I'm going to compare what you guys thought how FlipGrid was and how they thought it was. And then we want to analyze and comment, suggest to what we should do for the next FlipGrid action team at the next year when we're talking to other teachers. So when I looked back at what your students had, it was really interesting. So out of the 6 students from 5 classes and 30 students, most of your students said the hardest thing they had to do was organizing or editing or make corrections. So we kind of knew that already. That was like the hardest part of the writing, was organizing their thoughts and making those corrections. However, 72% of your students said they were great writers already. So they already felt good about themselves. And then how frequent do you feel your teachers reading and writing? Most of them, 90% of them said either most of the time or all the time. So you guys were on it about giving them feedback. But when we talked about their classmates, we see that most of them said they either got a few assignments or no assignments with student feedback. And that's really where we thought we were going to make some gains, because we thought we were going to use FlipGrid to build student achievement, because we were going to allow students to have feedback with each other, right? And that was our first goal. And of course, that didn't totally happen. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. When the literature review that I had, it talks again about having that honest feedback and having kids have human interaction and having teachers give the honest feedback with a human face. This was all important. I think we really saw that it was more important than ever during our quarantine time, when you saw a lot of your kids running to come to your class because they miss that human interaction, even if it's on a screen. So we know that FlipGrid offers a feedback piece that other digital applications don't offer, because it is kind of a human face. Do you guys agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And so when I think about it, here was our achievement data before we started. So in the first benchmark data, you guys, I got 30 participants. my 10 lower score writers, my 10 average writers, and my 10 proficient writers. And you can see right over here, this is where we kind of started. And then this was the average score of your class. Now, that was with 30 students. Only 17 students were able to give me the second benchmarks, and we know why, because a lot of you were not able to give benchmarks because we had to leave by mid-March. So you weren't even able to give me that second benchmark, much less the third benchmark. So I only had 17 participants in the second benchmark. And we can still see that even with those 17, the average still went up, and that the average scored writers do seem to kind of go with the flow of the average writers. But the truth of it is this data is skewed, right? Because we didn't have 30 to begin with. We only had 7. We didn't have 30 to end with. We only had 17. So when we look at this, we can see that maybe FlipGrid helped. But I think what I saw, which was more the data that actually surprised me the most, was actually looking at your perception data. So in your perception data, it asked in January, so we started in January. I asked you guys what statement sums up best of your experience teaching writing, and I had one of you say you don't feel comfortable at all. I had another one say you feel comfortable, but you're not really confident in your results. And then everybody else was in this, I'm in process of some of my writing, but not all my writing. And in really 2.5 months of being in the classroom, we were able to move. You guys moved from feeling that little bit of confidence all the way to moving up at least 1 or 2 steps. So now I have 2 of you that say, I'm confident in the process, but I'm not confident in my results. And 2 more of you saying, I feel comfortable in the writing, but not all writing. And then I even have 1 of you that says, you're comfortable and confident in all types of writing. So your perception has definitely changed on the writing in this FlipGrid data. Do you guys think you have changed a little bit in the writing process because you use FlipGrid? Has that helped you guys out in wanting feedback from your students and how you feel about your students?
It has helped me.
Okay.
I would say that having them use FlipGrid to give that feedback about writing is definitely a two-way street, because you hear feedback on their writing, but it also kind of gives you feedback on how you're teaching that type of writing, because you can see the misconception from their point of view.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is, that you guys felt more comfortable because you knew what the misconceptions were for your students.
Right.
And so when we looked at the commentary of your perceptions, this is a quick video I made using FlipGrid. So for those of you
have a rubric to follow
who do not understand FlipGrid, this is what FlipGrid does. It gives you that feedback video.
As long as students were able to have a rubric to follow, as well as a video representation of what an exemplar FlipGrid response would be, they were able to enhance what they already had on their paper.
So for me, I feel like FlipGrid really helped the students in the rough draft phase of their writing. The pre-writing is still very much difficult for my students, but with the rough draft, they're allowed to read what they wrote and then, say, okay, this does not make sense.
I love the idea of using FlipGrid for writing. Again, as I've mentioned before, just hearing the writing out loud is something that may help the auditorial learners actually move into being better writers.
They love recording videos and being able to hear what they wrote, and that gives them a chance to make any necessary corrections. Also, another positive about FlipGrid, about using FlipGrid in the writing process, is that during the drafting process, the students are able to provide feedback.
My students viewed it as a fun activity instead of a real tool to assist in helping them to draft, pre-write, read their rough draft, do peer review.
Okay, so, and as we saw, you guys definitely did help me out with, I appreciate the data there that you guys gave me. Let's move on. So again, you guys said that, with a rubric, it made pre-writing enjoyable. It helped out auditory learners who don't like to totally write, but like to say it, move them on. So how do you think you guys compared with your data and how you felt about FlipGrid with what your peers thought?
It sounded similar.
Yeah.
It sounded like students across the board are benefiting just from hearing their writing out loud. Because I feel like if you struggle with punctuation or even fluency when you're reading out loud, it will help you. And it sounded like that's what it was doing for everybody's students.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we were kind of all on the same page. We were all coming out. We'll talk about that, is that as an action team, we were all kind of coming to the same conclusions. So what I did is I actually looked at, I took a FlipGrid study of your TAP cohort. So not you guys, but the TAP cohort. And I asked them these questions here, which we'll kind of go through. But here, the first question I asked them, had you ever heard of FlipGrid? 95% said yes, and then 80% had heard it in the PLC. And you can see there, these are the questions we'll kind of run through. But we want to see, you guys, we went through we worked some things out. We had talked through what was working, what was hindering us. And so I want to see if essentially the content that we discussed, is it the content that people were coming up with on their own? And so when we look at this, 53 TAP people from the TAP teachers from your cohort responded, and 28 of those 53 actually used FlipGrid in their classroom, which is pretty good. So we had a higher number of people using FlipGrid in their classroom. 16 of them said they used it before social distancing, and then 8 said they used it during social distancing and now. So that they used it before and now. So we see that the 8 kept with it. And of course, 4 used it after social distancing, which must be really interesting to introduce a new technology platform right when you're not in the classroom. When I looked at what they were using FlipGrid for, most of them were using it for reading language arts, the thing that we were talking about for writing, and then for social studies, which is probably, I would say, another major language arts content area. And when I looked at what FlipGrid assignments for reading and writing, so I took out only the people said they were using FlipGrid for reading and writing. And I wanted to see what they were using it for. And a lot of them were saying that they used it for students to present information and to read their writing, just like we had done, and for students to give feedback on their assignments and explain their thinking. So just like what we had said, we were kind of wanting to help push our students in their rigorous writing. We already see that people who were not in our action group, they were thinking the same thing. So we both were cohesive on that part. And then your cohort said that 93% said using FlipGrid made their lesson more effective, and that 96% said they will plan on using FlipGrid more frequently. So we know we have people who want to use FlipGrid, they think it's effective. So the question is, how do they feel about best practices? What is getting in their way of using FlipGrid effectively? And I think that's where we have to look at what we said. So we've had 4 meetings, and in those 4 meetings, we've discussed what has worked and what has not worked. So when I say FAT, that's FlipGrid Action Team, okay? But 100% of you said when we had our last meeting, everybody agreed in our team that rubrics work and must be effective. But if you look at what in the orange here, your cohort, only 4 teachers said they used FlipGrid, they used rubrics during FlipGrid. So we know there is obviously people are using it, but they might not be using it effectively. 3 out of 5 of you said it really worked better for you as a center activity because you said it got too noisy. And if we look at the hindrances of FlipGrid from our group here, 40% of them said the thing that they didn't like about FlipGrid, it was too loud. And then, of course, we also agreed, and then we spent a big time on this one, that digital etiquette must be taught. So a lot of you, we talked about how do we teach the students what words they need to say, how do they need to present themselves, how long does it need to be, even how their parents should react to it. We talked about making even curriculum and content for that. And as you see over here, what was the number one thing that your TAP cohort complained about the most was that comments on FlipGrid and had difficulties because they had a hard time managing student behavior. So we know digital etiquette was something to be taught. So now that we see that FlipGrid, at least if it's done anything, it changed your perception. It made you guys feel more comfortable in the writing process. So what I'm asking you guys is, how do you think we should engage TAP teachers next year to build confidence using this application? And what curriculum and material do you think we need to build those best practices of rubrics, center activities, and for building digital etiquette? What do you guys think we need to do next year? Because next year I want you guys to lead the team in helping me teach the new TAP cohort how to use FlipGrid. What do you think we need to do?
I think for me, honestly, the being introduced to FlipGrid during class time, where I'm actually a student in the class and using it in the way that I would expect my students to use it, was helpful because I was able to learn how to use it and then implement that into my actual classroom. So I think that would be something, especially for those of us who aren't technologically savvy. Is that the right way to say it? I think having them do it, say maybe for an evaluation of the class or just to talk about their own work that they're doing in human growth and development or something like that, would help them understand how to use FlipGrid.
So we know that. What do we need to? How are we going to let them push on that into, let's say, into the classroom? Is there something we need to give them? Do you feel like they need some more curriculum or instruction to say, okay, I did this once in the classroom, now I can do it in my own classroom?
I think it will definitely be beneficial to have something to show them how to use it for their particular content area. So what I just suggested would help them build their confidence using the application. Yeah. But maybe having some kind of small, like, hey, if you're teaching writing, then you can use FlipGrid in these different ways to help promote X, Y, and Z. Have some type of guidance, like a guidance or something.
Okay. What do you think,
Yeah,
Ms. Smith?
I agree with Ms. Arrow because I think that having practice with the application, first of all, showing them from beginning to end, like how to set it up, because I know that is a major hindrance because people are like, they don't understand how to set it up and in what ways we can use it. You know, it can go with math, it can go with science, it can go with social studies, it can go with all the curriculums. It's just people don't know how to use it. So I think if we set an example of how to use it, not just as a teacher, but as a student, it'll be easier for us to troubleshoot the things that are going on in our classroom with our students. So if we have an assignment to where you need to give feedback, that'll be the moment where you walk through the steps. Okay, this is how you view someone's and this is how you respond to it. So pretty much the questions we're going to have in class will be the questions our kids going to have. So we'll have experience with answering and troubleshooting those issues if we've done that already by ourselves on both ends, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So and then my question to you is, how would you present the best practices then? The rubric, the digital etiquette, and putting it as a more of a center activity.
So I think that's where the mock assignment will come in, because I will present the teachers with the rubric. I will present them with the exemplar, i.e. something I've already recorded as a acceptable response, literally walking the teachers through exactly what I would do with the students, and allowing them to, trial and error with the videos, because I think that's something that fortunately we had already been using FlipGrid, so my kids already knew if they didn't like a video what to do. Like, they didn't have to come and ask me those certain questions because I allowed them to troubleshoot that long before we had to use it for an actual assignment. So allowing the teachers to do that as well. But yeah, absolutely. For like front loading them with the best practices so that they can implement those. And sometimes it won't work for their class. Like for me, I worked on it with centers, but to be honest, my kids had gotten to a place where they were more independent. So they knew once they reached a certain phase, they would go and do FlipGrid on their own. So it wasn't necessarily a center. So that might not be the best practices for everyone. So I think just front loading them with that and making them comfortable with it. So if they want to implement the center's part, they can, because they have that information and they know how to run it. If they don't, here's another option. You know what I mean? So I
guess that's really what we mean by centers. Then we want to be able to teach the teachers how the kids can have autonomy in this, because if the teacher makes them do it all at once, it seems to be too noisy.
Yeah, it won't work out. It won't work out.
Exactly.
So, but I think just front loading them with that information would definitely be beneficial for them to, use it in their actual classroom.
So next year, I will definitely get in contact. We'll keep in contact, of course, because you're my cohort. But I definitely want you guys to help me out next year in either a Tech for Tap or a virtual Tap class. for us to help the new teachers so that they can also feel very comfortable with this digital tool.